Mr. Scholey, good to see you.
Mr. Horrocks, great to see you. How you doing?
No, really good. Thanks, Ollie. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. This is the fourth episode of Ocean Memos, and yeah, I'm just really intrigued to find out more about you, more about how you got into the industry. I mean, we've worked a little bit together. We've never actually worked together in the field, which we need to rectify. But yeah, I'd really just like to know, Ollie, if you could just kind of start there. Just talk a little bit about your background, how you became interested in film, and then specifically your interest in the ocean. I mean, I know you make films about sort of terrestrial things as well, but yeah, if you could just fill us in a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, sure. No, because it's funny because I mean, I definitely came into filmmaking, not in the ocean space at all. Like I worked, as a sort of topside camera assistant for the first kind of 5 years of my career, and never went anywhere near the ocean at all. So yeah, no, it's been a kind of long journey. I guess I started out obviously a childhood massively inspired by the natural world and David Attenborough and documentaries, and
Mm.
yeah, I remember growing up. I had this like a cutout magazine on my wall, or a picture from a magazine on my wall, of a whale shark like going at the camera, and I just thought like that's like I just love like that's the dream, just be able to see those kind of big ocean creatures, and fascinated by sharks and all the kind of cool animals, if you like, in the sea and everything. And yeah, I guess and then grew up always wanted to be a wildlife filmmaker. So studied zoology at university and kind of read that. And then I just completely landed on my feet when I finished university. I got so lucky. At the time, so this was in 2012. It was right when the Disneynature kind of franchise was at its peak, I guess. So yeah, so there'd been a lion film about African cats, and then right when I came out, they were making the grizzly bear film. So bears for Disneynature. And the filming plan for that was essentially 2 seasons. So 2 summers. So it was summer 2012, summer 2013, and basically get every single long lens camera person in the entire industry to Alaska for the summer, or for both of those summers. So yeah, and they were on like a rota. So it was like literally week by week throughout the summer. There's like every like or yeah, huge numbers of camera people were just out living in Alaska for that period. And they needed loads of support. Like the production team was the normal size, but they just needed lots of field assistants, basically, and camera assistants. And I just completely lucked out and got taken on as a sort of camera assistant for that project. And yeah, and spent 2 summers out in Alaska and Canada, filming with grizzly bears, and yeah, it was just this enormous apprenticeship. I got to see how like Sophie Darlington, Gavin Thurston, Warwick Sloss, like all these different camera people, and just spend just tons of time with them. And living with grizzly bears and filming grizzly bears that you can approach on foot and be near, and really craft story. When you're not right on the end of a long lens and something's miles away, we're right in the middle of it. You could sit on
Mm.
a river's edge and watch the salmon and the bears come about, and we had to deliver an 86-minute film, so we needed lots of scenes and story and stuff like that. So it was it was just this kind of brilliant, unbelievably fortunate introduction into wildlife filmmaking. And then it kind of carried on from there, because once so often with this industry, once you've done one sort of role, you can end up getting a similar one. And yeah, then I ended up sort of from off the back of that doing kind of 4 years of camera assisting on a range of different productions after that. So yeah, that's sort of where
Okay.
it all began.
Just explain, and I've got a sense of it. I came more through the sort of camera world, but how does the progression work? If you want to become a filmmaker or a producer, what we sort of call a producer in the Bristol world, what does that progression look like? Where do you start, and then sort of, is there what happens when you're done with producing? Is it the exec producing? If you just explain that kind of path in a way.
Yeah, I mean, the path in, there's no rules. Like,
Mm.
I mean, weirdly, I actually, having done, I think I've done 20 international shoots, and then I really wanted to work in production. and I applied for a job on Blue Planet 2 and didn't make the cut. I didn't get past the interview process on it. Despite having a lot of field experience, but obviously they were looking for people with more production experience. They wanted people who were, more rounded storytellers, better researchers, people who were better at finding stories than someone who was just good with cameras, which is essentially, on paper was all I kind of was at the time. So yeah, I think, to enter that line to producer, I guess people are looking for that range of skill sets. They're looking for storytellers, people who are good at finding new information, new ideas, and then also that kind of field skills to an extent, but more just enough of kind of field knowledge to know what stories are going to work. So can you find something that's, firstly kind of quite academic, but then convert that into something that sort of materializes on screen. So yeah, I guess that's kind of, and there's a lot of ways to do that, to get yourself into that position, to get your first production job.
Okay. I guess it's similar in the filming world as well. There's not necessarily one way in, but the path once you're in is kind of relatively clear. I mean, certainly on the camera side, it's you come in as an assistant cameraman or camerawoman or camera operator assistant, and then hopefully after 5 or 6 years of doing that, you get an opportunity to sort of make the break and become the primary cinematographer. How does it work on the production side? Or should I say editorial? It's kind of the editorial side, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because they're both it's apprenticeships, right? Like they both, like a camera assistant role is an apprenticeship. Like you spend
Correct.
a huge amount of time next to someone very, very, very experienced. You watch them, and it's just the best job. Like I love being a camera assistant. Like I just think, even every now and again now as a producer, you get to stick a rucksack in the back, rucksack in the front, off you go. And it's the best thing because you just get to, it's just you're just in this seat, you're just learning and you're just absorbing, and there's bits of pressure, but there's nothing like the pressure of being the person with the camera or whatever. But in production, it's the same. Like once you've got a job as a researcher, you're effectively an apprentice to a producer or an assistant producer or whoever else is in that line. And again, I guess going back to my career progression, I had a phenomenal apprenticeship from someone who's been on this podcast, Hugh Pearson. I got a job having done camera assisting. I got a job as a researcher on Our Planet. I worked with Hugh and Gisela Sverdrup. It was the assistant producer at the same time. I just got this incredible apprenticeship from them because I could just, I sat in an office with them for 4 years. You watch every conversation. You just see how they put stuff together. You see what happens when the heat comes on the producer and how Hugh would manage that, and how he'd manage successes, how he'd manage failures, how he'd look at. And there were points in Our Planet where it was hard, like things didn't go to plan. And just seeing how Hugh would work through that and how he'd refine the plan and the budgets and everything else and manage the team through that, as well as being, obviously, as exceptional in the field, and how he could help deliver sequences actually, in person in the field. I think that's how I personally kind of learned and developed. It was under that kind of apprenticeship from Hugh and lots of other people at Silverback. At the same time, I was working with Sophie Landfear, who made the Frozen Worlds episode of Our Planet. And again, very sort of quite a different sort of style as producer to Hugh. But again, amazing apprenticeship. She's had this incredible attention to detail with story and craft, and how to convert images of the Arctic and the Antarctic into really, really, really engaging stories. So I think that's the thing. I think if you can get yourself in as a researcher and get into the right team, it's just in the same way as being an assistant, it's just absorbing those people around you, trying to just learn as much as you can.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. It's something that I really encourage people to do as well, is don't rush your apprenticeship, because once you make the transition, to being a DOP or being a producer, you don't ever get that luxury again, right? To just soak it all in. So it's such a valuable time.
100%. There's no one helps you. right? When you're a camera person, that's it. Like, you're there, you're the top of the tree, and everyone's just watching you, being like, okay, well, are you going to get it? And it's the same as a producer. Like, that's it. The expectation is solely on you. So if you get into that space and you haven't learned what you need to know, that's it. Okay, you maybe got the series producer who might help you, but they're obviously busy in their stretch, and as a camera person, okay, maybe the producer might be able to kind of help and guide and steer, but your ability to be supported dwindles very rapidly when you get into those two kind of roles. So yeah, I completely agree. I think the more time you can spend in those positions in this industry where you're being apprenticed, I think the more the better. Because then when you finally do get there, then it's just like, okay, cool, I know what to do now. This is fine. I'm now, I'm in the seat. I've got the responsibility, but I have the knowledge and the experience to deliver the product. No, I couldn't agree more.
And then it's something I became a lot more familiar with through my work on our oceans, where I was involved right from the beginning. But one of the things I'm always fascinated with is stories. How do you tackle? So, for example, recently, you produced your first show on parenthood with the ocean component. How does, you as the producer, but also the team, I guess, how do you go about finding stories, deciding, which stories you want to tackle, and then also, I guess, balancing the risks? Some stories must be very difficult. Just if you could just talk us through that process to a degree.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and obviously the whole everything in wildlife filmmaking kind of falls back to story, and I guess there's sort of two things that you're kind of covering there, isn't it? There's the story within the sequence, so within those 5 minute stories that we bring back, there's that story, and then there's like the overall kind of narrative of the film, and how those sequences, the stories within those sequences build into that overall kind of picture. So I guess I'll just start with a kind of the sequence level. And this is somewhere, right at the beginning of my career, I was quite kind of weak on. I think if I reflect, I was very much in a space of like, get the shot, like what's the shot like, and I wasn't. I know in my early work I wasn't thinking about that kind of what are all the kind of steps that go together. And I can actually remember the moment where the kind of penny dropped me in terms of what's the value in telling that kind of sequence story. And it was on Our Planet. I was in South Georgia with Sophie Lamford and Jamie McPherson, another phenomenal camera person that I was very privileged to spend a lot of time with. And we were filming the sequence, which is leopard seals hunting penguins on a beach, where leopard seals like run up the beach. They get out of the water and they grab leopard seals. They grab king penguins off the beach. Something we'd never expected to see. Something no one had really heard of, and we got to this bay and it was happening. And after like 2 or 3 days of filming it, we're out in the rib. We're going along with the Cineflex, filming this behaviour. Go back in the evening, look at the rushes, and Jamie just has the shot. I just looked at it and I was like, great, that's it. Like, wow, we're done. Like, tick, that's amazing. And he had this, it's like hundreds of penguins splashing everywhere. There's leopard seal like rearing out, like grabbing it. And I was like, great, we're done. And he was like, no, we're not. What do you mean? And he was like, well, that's one shot. We've got 99 left. Like, come on, let's go. And to me, that was the moment. Like, I was just like, oh, okay, yeah. Because it sounds kind of simple, but it's, I guess, in terms of your sequence, it's like, okay, well, what are the 5 things that happened? Like, what's the setup? What's, who are the characters? What's one character doing? What's the other character doing? Well, how does that materialize in screen time? Like, how are you going to get that minute of setup of your protagonist, the minute of your antagonist? What's the kind of build up to the behavior? Then what's the central behavior, which is often what everyone kind of like, and certainly I was just homing in on, like, what's the hunt? What's the thing that is your sort of pass fail, if you like, within a sequence? And then what's the kind of resolution after that? And so I think in terms of delivering story on that level, it's like what's your character? What are the 5 things that happens to them, and how does that equate to screen time? And then in terms of how you actually budget it from a production perspective, that's the whole, we look at the cost of the shoot against the time it will deliver on screen as a mathematical equation. Which, and obviously to get to that stage, you need tons of research, ideas, like, you have to work the whole thing out. But that's effectively what it boils down to. So yeah, I think that's the kind of, in terms of your sequence story, that's it. It's like, what are the 5 things? Don't over focus on the thing or the like central behavior. Really like, beef out as much as it can. Find where the edges are in terms of the story. And then if you can do all that, and that your 5 things are going to happen, they're all going to last for a bit on screen. You're going to surprise people. There's going to be a range of emotions within what you see. Then that's your kind of sequence. And
Okay. How do you tackle the diversity of stories? I mean, I've in my experience of the sort of what I call the Bristol style, very much defined by planet Earth, blue planets. There's sometimes a range of stories. Some of the sequences are more, I wouldn't say they're vignettes or montages, but they're more of a kind of a celebration of, a little bit like what Hugh did in Our Planet with the opening and closing sequences in Mosul, where it was, he had a narrative which was introducing the film and then he wanted to close the film. So they weren't really stories. They were more kind of these beautiful montages. That was like one kind of sequence that I remember Hugh doing. Then you get some that are much more intricate. I call them mini Pixars. It's, there's a very clear hero and he's got a problem and he's trying to solve this thing and there's a challenge. And then you get some which are more behavioral in the sense that, it's very objective. You kind of watching a behavior. And I think, Planet Earth defined that to a T, just that kind of style. What is your sort of preference in that kind of mix? Are you the kind of person who likes to, really sort of anthropomorphize animals, or do you prefer to keep more of a objective feel? And what is your thoughts on those two different styles? Because my sense is that's kind of where our industry is divided, right? There's some that prefer to tell very much, stories about the animals. And then there's, somewhere it's more objective and more kind of removed.
Yeah, it's a really interesting divide. I mean, I guess I personally don't have a kind of preference, but I think it links to, the other part of story, which is, away from the sequence. It's like, what's the overall narrative of your film? I mean, interestingly, I've just come off the back of, on the one hand, making Parenthood, where, taking the Gannet story, for example, following like a Gannet and, two Gannet parents and their sort of journey, which is like epic. It's like an 11-minute kind of saga. But at the same time, I was working on Ocean with David Attenborough, and there's no character in that at all. That's all about an overarching story about, the health of the ocean and how we can fix it and all these sorts of things. And I think it's, those are two quite good examples, really, because there's not a better or worse. It just depends where you want the audience to kind of leave, really. Take like Our Oceans again. That was a series to me that was there to just inspire people about the ocean, tell these bonkers stories about all these incredible animals, and really raise the bar on those stories, and then deliver some kind of bigger messages as well. Versus Ocean with David Attenborough, which is all about a story about a landscape, really, about a big place that needs help, and there's no there's not a single here's this animal doing this in the whole film. So yeah, I think it's important as an industry that we drive both of those types of stories, because I think it helps keep our industry diverse in terms of what it creates. I think that's so you don't end up with too many kind of similar story styles going out on streaming services and on channels. I think it's just important that we as the filmmakers within the industry are pushing all those types of stories as hard as we can, down to the kind of real Bugs Life, very scripted, storyboarded, controlled type of storytelling, all the way to things like Ocean David, which is a bit more kind of grand. So yeah.
Just on that, you mentioned storyboarding. It's something that in my career I've seen become more and more prevalent, certainly with the high-end productions where there's budget for it. But when I started back in 2008 with Didier, it might have just been that I wasn't working on those types. Well, working with cameramen that operated on the more complex sequences, but storyboarding wasn't as prevalent then. I mean, what is your what are your thoughts on the benefits of having a storyboard, and how do you deal with the situation where you get into the field and of course it's just nothing like the storyboard?
Yeah, it's interesting, aren't they? I see them as a double-edged sword in some ways. Like I think if you're doing a your story where five things happen, you know what they're going to be, then it can be really useful. It can be a really useful tool, right? Because especially with smaller animals, and if you kind of know you need a lot of shots to make your story work, then it can be a really helpful way of visualizing how the whole thing's going to play out, to give your editorial teams and the cinematographers a really clear idea of where it's kind of going to go. But then in a way, like, the beauty of natural history is you don't know what's going to happen. And the beauty of natural history is when, we all come back from these jobs surprised because the cinematographer got an image or a perspective on what was happening that no one expected. Or, the producer or the researcher or the local person you're working with just comes up with an idea that no one had thought of in the storyboarding. And I think if you're locked into a storyboard and you see it as like a checklist, you take away some of the kind of craft. So that's kind of, I guess, within when you know what's going to happen, when you know a lot of what's going to happen, I think there's a danger in them in that sense. But then also, in this industry, you go for things where a storyboard is just utterly pointless. Like we did killer whales in Bremer Bay in Western Australia for Parenthood, and the storyboard was just like, try as hard as you can, like just try and image these things, and it's you have no control, and those, and you need, going back to what you're saying about what you need to make these kind of rich films, you need a bit of both, and that comes in shoots like on the killer whales where you're just completely at their mercy, and whatever they do, you just try and cover it to the best of your ability, and I hope you hit record type thing, compared to stories where there's lower risk because you know what's going to happen a lot of the time, and then perhaps the storyboard is more useful. But yeah, I think tread carefully with them is my feeling, because of that, the magic of kind of serendipity in these stories, I think.
Yeah. So in terms of cinematographers that you work with, camera people, what would you say? I mean, when you, because the producer chooses, right? In our industry, it's very much, there might be a steer from an exec, but it's ultimately, that film is your film. As the producer, you're essentially the filmmaker, you're the director. What do you look for in a camera operator or DOP? There's use the terms interchangeably, but like, just explain, your thought process and I guess what's at stake if you get it wrong.
Yeah, I think it's a tricky question in a way, because obviously there's there's the kind of, there's elements to it. It's just like, experience, track record, blah 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 blah. All those sorts of things that are hard to attain. But I think beyond that, what are the features that people with experience and proven track records have, I think, is a better way of kind of looking at it, really. And I think all the best and most experienced camera people are storytellers, and they're in there with you, right? It's not, they don't come to you saying, what shots do you want? That's not the conversation. That's probably the last conversation that you'd have, if you have it at all, because if you get the story right, you don't need to have that conversation about what shots you're going to get, right? You may talk about techniques or like equipment or like visual style sort of thing, and then that lends it to itself. So I think that's the first thing, really. I think if you meet up and coming camera people that just want to engage on a story level, and obviously what the kind of narrative, but also the visual storytelling of a scene, and how can we use the tools we have available to us as an industry to better tell the stories of these animals. I think that's a great place to start if you're trying to sort of either you're established and you want to kind of move up, or you want to sort of get a foot in the door. I think that's what producers are looking for. They're looking for people who are going to sit in a room with them and engage at a creative level about how to make the story better through the visuals. So yeah, and then that's kind of it really. And then I guess and then I think people who kind of break the rules visually as well, I think is really cool. I think if you and people who really want to engage with their subject to get the best out of the story, I think that's the other thing that really sets people apart. Like for example, if you see a show reel that's it might be beautiful, but it's just lots of shots of, let's say someone's got a show reel from a coral reef and there's lots of beautiful kind of images, things, versus someone who's just like got into a rock pool and filmed a snail, and the snail has a little journey and goes along and does something like, I don't know, something like that, where you're eking out story in an environment that people haven't really seen. I think that's a much better kind of way to go about it, really. And it's kind of more attaining, because you can do that with anything, really. You can do that with any animal, in a park or a garden or your local coastline or whatever it is. So yeah.
And let's just turn a little bit towards the ocean. You mentioned earlier that you kind of started out more terrestrial, but you've definitely carved out a niche for yourself and a reputation as being someone who really excels in the ocean space. Just unpack that a little bit. Was that just by chance of meeting, working with Hugh, or just explain a little bit about that, and what do you feel makes the ocean different, working on the ocean, natural history storytelling in the ocean compared to land? Or are there any differences that you sort of aware of?
Yeah, I guess. Well, so on our planet, I was half on the Hughes Oceans films and then half on the Polar film, which is kind of an ocean film as well. Obviously, a lot more of the photography is from on the land, but it was a story about the sea ice. So, and I was lucky enough to do a couple of like little underwater shoots on that film as well. So, I'd sort of had some exposure to it. I was very intimidated by the diving, I think, in media jobs. I found I just couldn't ever see myself being like a rebreather diver. I just felt like I'm never going to get the hours, I'm never going to get the experience. Like it felt really unattainable, if I'm honest. I just thought, like, how does anyone kind of get there? I thought it was something, maybe it was easier 10 years before I'd started or whatever. So yeah, I was kind of unsure, but then I did a shoot with Doug Anderson, someone I've worked with a lot, and yeah, I think he really gave me the confidence to kind of do it. He was just he taught me through the rebreather training. I was just like, just do the course, like just try and get sponsored to do the course, and you're super lucky because you work in Silverback and they own rebreathers, so just try and do that. And then once you've done that, if you do a shoot, then you'll have some hours, and then that's it, and it's really simple. So I think the penny kind of dropped for me there, that it was, and I think he made it feel a bit more kind of achievable than what I'd sort of seen at the time. So I finished up on our planet, and there was sort of opportunity to do that. So I did a rebreather course, and then worked on a production called The Mating Game for BBC One as an assistant producer. And I was on the ocean film with that, and we did some mega underwater scenes on it, like humpback whale competition pods where we were using rebreathers to film that, and manta rays and all sorts of other things. And I quite quickly on that film, I guess, got a lot of experience and hours, and got a lot more used to the diving and all that sorts of things. And and it was nowhere near as, I guess the moral of that is, it was nowhere near as unattainable as I'd sort of seen. I think it looked, there's a facade to the diving in our industry that makes it look really like it's scary and challenging, and it's it's not easy. It's not a walk in the park, but it's definitely sort of doable. So yeah, and I think, and through working more underwater, I just find it really exciting. I just think there's a treasure trove of stories underwater. There's just, like if someone asked me to make a film about the Serengeti, I'd find it really difficult, because the quality of productions about the Serengeti are extraordinary, and the stories that have been found there are amazing. So I don't know how you find 10 new ideas in the Serengeti. Whereas if someone said to me, pick any ocean in the world, so I'd make a film about that, I'd be like, sweet, fine. I know it's in there. I know those stories are going to be down there. We've just got to kind of get together and work it out. So I think I kind of love it in that sense, and I love it because I think visually it's so interesting as a visual medium to work in. I think the fact that you can place tiny little animals next to the biggest animals that have ever existed on the planet is fascinating, and I think that you can film entire stories in that sort of like 16 to 100 mil space, and not have, whereas I find sometimes with terrestrial films, you can get that kind of like long lens fatigue in a way, where everything kind of feels like it's, all a little bit distant, and you're never kind of getting immersed in the subject. And I think, that aspect of underwater filmmaking, I find, really, really, really fascinating. And the way you can kind of depict biodiversity through that, the fact that you can show that here's this tiny little thing going on in its world, and just above it there's like this giant shark that swims over it, or whatever. So I think, in terms of visual storytelling, I think it's a really interesting space to work in. And then the conservation stories there are so important. I mean, it's such an easy win for conservation. And I think there's still so much space to tell the conservation story of the ocean that we haven't quite explored yet. So I just find it so exciting, inspiring. I think there's just so much more to kind of do in terms of ocean filmmaking. I can see an entire life's work going into filming the ocean and barely scratching the surface, genuinely.
Brilliant. I'm going to paint you a scenario. Let's say you've got a relatively inexperienced camera person, but talented, good with story. You're going on a shoot with them because it's their kind of first time, and then suddenly you, for whatever reason, break your leg or whatever, you can't go. What would your brief be to them in terms of trying to nail it, in terms of getting the coverage? Like if you just had 5 minutes before they flew off to kind of brief them as to, how they could best achieve that without your guidance, what would that be?
I think I'd give them the story very clearly, like 5 things you need to achieve. I think knowing when to move on is the most important thing. And it's something I still don't, and the teams I work in still don't quite get right. I think we over polish and then we don't move on to get something different. Like a sequence is in its very nature is a collection of different images. So I think that the biggest risk we fall into is we just get saying, perfect the same thing again and again and again. You don't get that kind of breadth of images to tell your story. And I think your ability to move on is entirely dependent on your diligence with viewing your footage. Like if you're not really critically assessing what you filmed every single day, and like we did on the Gannett shoot, Rog, like really crunching it down to like, have we got this? What are the images we've got? Like, and boiling it down to those, like, okay, I might have filmed, an hour's footage today, but what are the 3 minutes that are really like on point and are going to be in the sequence, and working those out each day. I think that's the most important thing you can do. And if you get to a stage, you're like, I don't have the time, I've burn the whole day, and I've got to fix, get my reader ready. Find time. Like, it doesn't matter. That's the most important thing. Create time, dive less, do whatever you need to do to really know what you've got, and work out where to kind of move on. So yeah, I think that would be my sort of
Okay.
top.
No, that's super helpful. It's something that I'm struggling with on shoots more and more, is, with having multiple channels, obviously shooting digital as well, there's a temptation sometimes to overshoot. And then especially if it's really long days in the field, you just, you struggle to really give it that attention that you require. So yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, that is just so fundamental. And then the next day you can go back and, you can tick those off and then focus on those things. And really what you're talking about there is coverage, right? You're talking about story coverage in terms of getting sufficient material to actually cut the story, because, you can have one amazing shot, but if you don't have the coverage, it's not going to work.
100%. Like exactly that. If me and Jamie had come back from that shoot with one shot of a leopard seal grabbing a penguin, like, where are we going to go with it? Yeah, that's it. Get rid. Yeah, you've let everyone down. So yeah, no, it's exactly that. And I think, but yeah, and you get, and it takes time to learn how to be critical. You rush, because it takes time to view the footage generally anyway, because it's it just becomes like 2 hours of your day. But the more you do it, the quicker you get, and the less of a stress it becomes on your filming. Whether you're filming stock and maybe you've paid to stay somewhere for a week to get a load of footage, and you want to just get the footage into there. I think the more time you can spend reviewing your material, knowing what you have, knowing what you don't have, the faster you get, more critical you get with it. So it's it's a really important skill to push, and it's something I'm still kind of growing with. It's taken me a long time to kind of really appreciate the importance of doing that and come up with systems to speed it up and everything, because it is hard. It's difficult when you're knackered, you just want to just stop and prepare for tomorrow, and you've got so many of these these big physical tasks that you have to do the next day to keep the job moving. But it's just like circling back to why are we here, what are we doing? And if you're not assessing the footage and whether you're telling that visual story or not every day, then you're breaking the main objective. So
yeah, great, Olly. One of the last things I wanted to sort of pick your brain on is, and I know we all kind of grappling with this, but with the the emergence of the internet and what is commonly called the creator economy, I mean, the ability now for individuals to actually craft small stories, small pieces, and to try and make a difference it's never been easier in a way, in terms of the tools and the things you can get access to. But clearly getting distribution, getting attention, getting that message out there is very, very difficult. From your perspective, where you're very much embedded in, the sort of more the big production side of things, I mean, what is your sense of where the industry is going? And I just frame that in the context of, I'm seeing industry forecasters in the industry predicting this kind of what they call the move to the small screen, right? Which is just more and more people spending more and more time on channels like YouTube and things like that. So I think there will always be massive demand for the great epic shows and series, because they're just so unique and so powerful. But what is your sense of that opportunity in a way, and where do you think, if people are looking to make a difference, what would your advice be to them?
I think, your use of the word opportunity that's the nail on the head, really. It's a massive opportunity that I don't. Yeah, and there's amazing stuff in that space already. Like, there are people who are sort of are making incredible content on YouTube. And someone at work said it to me recently. They said, I don't know what metrics they were looking at, but basically all the streaming services were either plateauing or falling, and the only thing in the media space that's just doing that is YouTube. So and I think but the divide between the images that have been achieved in series like Planet Earth or Our Planet or the big Netflix series and everything else has always been huge, right? Because the equipment's been so unattainable. The difference between having a £40,000 housing, a £30,000 or dollar camera to the basic GoPros or a stills camera that might have a little video function that can shoot at like 720p and isn't raw has just been, has made it the whole thing impossible. And that's just shrinking every single day. Like the price point for equipment has never been lower, really, in kind of relative terms. And I think with that, there's immense opportunity. I mean, the amount of Ocean with David Attenborough that was shot on an Osmo 4, like the little action camera, is crazy. And I was sat next to Doug at the premiere of it. And we, at the end of it, we were kind of like looking at some of this stuff shot on a DJI Osmo 4 on this giant screen. Like someone said, it's like the biggest screen in Europe or whatever. And you wouldn't know. Like it's shot next to red footage. Yeah. And of course you were there as well. You just see like, there's no, like, you can't tell anymore. So that's really exciting because it doesn't mean that if you're making something that's not going to drive the kind of revenue that something like Our Planet does, it doesn't kind of matter as much because everything can be on smaller economies. So you can have cheaper equipment to make something that might make less profit, but your proportional like earn is way better because there's one of you doing it. So you don't need to have 144 million people watch it for it to turn kind of profit. So I think it's just that, and I think it's trying to, and I think what you're doing with your course is brilliant in that sense because I think it's the equipment's been unattainable, but the skill set's been unattainable, and the skill set's is hard to achieve. It takes years and experience and support really, and the apprenticeships I've described, and obviously to do all that you need to be kind of continuously employed. And to get that whole kind of filmmaker set of skills does take a huge amount of time. There's no getting around that. But to get some of it doesn't. And to get enough of it, I think, to deliver images that are, maybe are not the top of like, Netflix, Disney Plus or whatever, but they're still really good and they're going to make your content shine in the YouTube space. Yeah, that's never been more achievable. So I think, I think it's just a brilliant opportunity. There's a brilliant time of opportunity for that.
And it works across the board because you can create, if you're creating kind of industry grade quality footage which is Netflix approved and stable and shot beautifully. I mean, so often it's just about holding the camera steady and letting the scene unfold because the scene is phenomenal. I mean, you could never direct something like that. It's you don't need to be doing fancy camera moves. So I think it's a very, very interesting time, and certainly I'm trying. But it's not just about the equipment, right? When you work on a big series, you've got the best editors, you've got incredible music, you've got so it's multiple dimensions that enable that kind of production value. But I think you're right, and I think with AI and things like that, there's no excuse anymore. The technology is there, the ideas are there. It fundamentally boils down to stories, right? Which is kind of where we started this whole discussion, is that it's fundamentally about telling stories that engage people, get people to change the way they think, or even just get them to feel passionate about something. Because if it has their attention, then people care about it and want to do something about it.
Yeah, no, 100%. That's the thing. And I think all the other, the things like the editing and the sound design you described, YouTube's like the winner for that as well, because not only are you making something for YouTube, but YouTube within it has all the information you need to do all those things. Like, all the free tutorials on how to use like DaVinci Resolve and everything else. And they're brilliant. So no, I think that's the thing. But it's but yeah, and again, I completely agree. It's not about like, you don't want to be the 1,000th person to get a nice shot of an animal. You want to be the person that creates a piece of content that people really want to watch because they're really interested in the story you're telling, because it's, you know, it's fascinating, or it's important, or it's, you know, peculiar, or whatever it is. And again, yeah, completely couldn't agree more. That's all in the story.
Mm. Awesome, Ollie. Well, fortunately, our time is pretty much up, but I'm sure I mean, I'd love to have you back at some stage as well to unpick a lot of things. I know there's going to be a lot of questions coming through from what you've discussed, and in a way, we've only just scratched the surface. But yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time, and good luck with the rest of the year, which is almost over, and hope to see you soon.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm actually going to go filming in a couple of weeks, which will be the first time I've done that in about a year or so. So
Fantastic.
no, it's all exciting. But thank you, Roger. Yeah, it's absolutely brilliant what you're doing, and I think everything I've seen from your course just looks, it's exceptional. And I think it's so contemporary as a. I think that I really think the last point we were talking about is so salient. That finding where that new space is in creating this content, I think is so important. I'm just really excited to see the people that kind of jump up and grab it, because I think it's it's all there for the
Awesome. Okay, Ollie, thanks for your time. Chat soon. Cheers, man.